with this?
Great.
Thank you. Caroline Gruen is formally elected as chair.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this remote meeting of the Joint Plans Panel. My name is Councillor Caroline Gruen, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. Before I proceed further, could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being streamed live on the City Council's YouTube channel. I would like to start the meeting today by confirming that this meeting of the Joint Plans Panel meets the requirements of the Council's constitution, even though members of the panel are in remote attendance. The Joint Plans Panel is an informal meeting which brings together the Council's area plans panels, City Plans Panel and Development Plan Panel for consultation and training. Whilst items today will be fully discussed as is usual, remote attendance requires a few slight changes as to how I manage the debate. Therefore, can I ask all attendees to mute their microphones unless I invite them to speak? This will avoid disruption from background noise. Can all participants please keep their cameras on during the meeting? However, it should be noted that if there are connectivity issues, as we have experienced already this afternoon, and the bandwidth is low, videos will cease to be shown and will be replaced by the participants' initials. Members wishing to ask questions and make comments should do so by using the raised hand facility. And I ask for your assistance and patience while I go through this process. In order to avoid any disruption to the meeting, should I lose internet connectivity, I propose that we appoint a deputy chair who could step in my absence, and I move Councillor Jim McKenna and invite another member to second that motion, please.
Second.
Thank you. I saw Councillor Cohen first. Thank you, Councillor Cohen. I'll take a vote by assuming your silence as approval and give a 5-second gap for that to occur. Thank you. Are there any objectors? And are there any abstentions? No, we're all in approval. Thank you. So at this point, I'd normally ask members of the plans panels of the Joint Plans Panel to introduce themselves, but on this occasion, there are so many members on the Joint Plans Panel that I will ask you to introduce yourself as you speak for the first time, please. So moving on to the agenda, could I ask Debbie, please, to go through the first two items up to number 6?
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item 2, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Item 3, there are no exempt items. Item 4, I'm not aware of any late items. Item 5, could I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests? I'll take silence as there are none. Agenda item 6, apologies have been received from Councillor Andrew Carter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So on to item number 7, which is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 14th of November 2019. It was quite a time ago. Do members accept these minutes are a true record? And again, on the true record bit, I'll assume correct unless indicated otherwise. Thank you. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? I'm just looking for hands. Yes, Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me all right? Because I'm back to the headset today. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Page 10, the third bullet point. As you know, it was my turn in the chair last time. And I asked about the use of section 215 notices and asked that we benchmark and bring a report to a future Joint Plans Panel. I appreciate times and COVID have probably got in the way of that, but I do think it's important that we stay to that commitment which was agreed at the last Joint Plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Would anyone like to comment on that, officers in attendance?
Thank you, Chair. Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management. Just to say that Councillor Ritchie is correct in that other matters have intervened somewhat in the progress of bringing that report to a panel, but it's still on the programme to do so. So thank you for that. And just while I'm on, actually, at page 9 of the minutes.
Okay, so we'll note that. We'll note that.
Thank you. Just a correction, actually, at page 9 on the third bullet point, it talks about grant funding of £506,000, which was actually £50,000. Just to make that clear.
Oh,
slight discrepancy there.
Quite an error there. Thank you very much. That's excellent. I've got Councillor Peter Gruen next.
Introducing myself, Councillor Peter Gruen. Hello. I want to refer to item 17, page 7, the second bullet point, which is around design champions. Now, I recall we invested a considerable amount of time in talking about design champions as part of changing our agenda from being purely numbers-based to saying we wanted to spend time on quality of design and quality of construction and build. And of course, there's been a total silence for the last 12 months on that particular concept. And I wonder if you could update us, please.
Is that
Thank
Jonathan
you, Councillor
again?
Gruen. David Feeney.
David.
It's David Feeney speaking, Councillor Gruen. David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer. Thank you, Councillor Gruen, for your comments on this. I mean, just to reassure you, it isn't something that we've forgotten about or overlooked. We did start a piece of work, as you know, looking at nominees for the design champion arrangements and the mechanics of how the process might work. And I think we worked up a proposition, which I think was shared with members, and we were seeking to see that through. Regrettably, because of the pandemic, we've not been able to put that in place as yet, but it's something that we can continue to work through as circumstances improve. The other point to make is that Mark Burgess, who was leading on it, has since left the authority, so we are working through a process of seeking to reappoint to that role. So this is something in terms of the design champion component that won't be overlooked. It's something that's still there that we'll be following through.
If I may, Chair,
thanks.
respond. Thank you, David. I accept the explanation, but take it from me that certainly in my neck of the woods, we are on the cusp of massive, significant developments. And if we miss the boat because we can't decide how to implement the best way of improving our knowledge, experience, expertise regarding design matters, we shall miss a great opportunity. And perhaps the plans chairs attending today could take this away and give it a little bit of extra momentum.
Thank you, Peter. Can we make a note to place that on the Plans Panel Chair's agenda, please? I've got Councillor Collins next.
Thank you, Chair. Page 8, there's a comment there about officers will look at land ownership of Highways England, known as ransom strips, and report findings back to members. I don't recall what the conversation was around that, but nor do I remember getting any information. If we didn't get some information, could I have it copied to me again, please?
Thank you, Councillor Collins. David speaking. David Feeney speaking. Chair, just to respond to that, I think the issue that was raised was in response to a very specific local matter in the Wetherby area raised by a member. And I recall that colleagues within the service did respond on that point, so we can dig out the response that was previously sent and circulate that to you, Councillor Collins, if that would be helpful. But it wasn't a general strategic point; it was to do with a very specific localised issue, I think, within the Wetherby area. My recollection is.
Right, Chair, can I come back?
I think it was David, but my recollection. Yeah. You may, yes.
I was just going to say it may be wise.
Yes, Dawn.
Tweak that statement a little bit to say that it was a local issue rather than a general issue.
That would be correct. Thank you, Councillor Collins.
Thank you. But I think most of us have experienced some examples of ransom strips and found ourselves in a bit of a knot around them, David. So any general information or even that repeated response would be helpful, I think, to all of us, to be honest.
Okay, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, fine.
Thank you.
Councillor Hamilton, I think you wish to raise something.
Just that, Chair, with regards to, I'm in attendance and I'm in apologies. and I left the meeting at 15:45. So if you look at on
Thank you.
minutes, I'm in attendance. I'm apology
Yes.
and Alexa.
We'll.
That's noted. Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. I'll make the amendments.
We will amend that. Thank you, Sharon. So I've got Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to raise the public speaking protocol. It's on page 8, minute 7. So I just like an update as to whether a plain English expert has given it the once over, because from my recollection, it wasn't made clear in the meeting.
Who would like to respond to that? Is it David again or Jonathan?
I'm happy to have a go, Chair, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
The issue of the public speaking protocol was raised at the last but one joint plans panel, and then it was brought again back up at the subsequent one, by which point the document had been revised and had been checked over for plain English. I think that some members felt that it still wasn't sufficiently clear. I think it was partly because of the technical nature of some of the phrases that had to be used, but we do now include a glossary as part of the protocol to hopefully allow the public and others to understand the types of terms that are referred to within the document.
Thank you. Does that satisfy you, Councillor Brooks, or would you like to have a further look at it out of the meeting?
I mean, if you could send it round again, that would be really helpful, just to make sure, because it's really important that people getting involved in the the planning process have all the information like laid out easily for them. So it's a really important part of the the democratic process, really. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure that'll be possible, Jonathan.
Yes, Chair, we can circulate the document, or at least a link to the document on the website, so that everybody can access it readily.
Lovely. Councillor Ray.
It's on a similar point, Chair. I think we also discussed actually about general accessibility, particularly to groups that have communication problems as well. So as well as having it plain English, have we looked to make sure that we have adaptations or have an ability to have adaptations for people that may need it, who have autism and other barriers that may actually make it very hard? Because again, you're just looking at things like autism, where there's a massive range of people in the general population, many undiagnosed. Actually, there's an overall accountability and accessibility point here. It's not just about plain English, it's about the entire accessibility agenda to our residents.
Yeah. I must say that I completely support that point, Councillor Ray. Jonathan?
Yes, that's a perfectly valid point, and I think it's probably a corporate issue for all documents. I mean, this is one of many guidance and protocols that we have across the authority, not just within planning. So it's certainly a point that we would support generally, and obviously we can raise that with colleagues that look after those issues corporately as well.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks, is that your hand up again, or is it historic?
Oh, sorry, Chair. I'll lower it.
No, that's fine. Debbie, if you could take hands down for me when people have spoken, I would be less confused.
I will try.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, we are going on to item 8 now, the Planning Services Performance Report. And Jonathan, could I ask you to present this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the normally an annual report on the planning performance, but for this one we've also incorporated the last 6 months. So it's the municipal year from 2019 to 2020, but also the period from April of this year to the end of September. So I'll just take members through the report. In summary, it sets out that the previous full year was quite a stable period in terms of workloads and performance, with performance being maintained at quite a good level. But obviously the first two quarters of this year were severely disrupted by the pandemic, with application numbers initially decreasing, but subsequently picking up quite quickly after the initial lockdown period. So from June onwards, case numbers picked up very rapidly. Clearly within the initial period, processing of new casework and enforcement activity was extremely difficult for officers, given the national restrictions in place. So the service has had to rely heavily on electronic systems, which obviously members will be aware has included the incorporation of remote plans panels within our work. So just taking members through the report then, just on the workload section at section 3.1, there's been a slight decrease in the number of formal planning applications, which reflects a national trend, but the proportion of major applications is still higher than the national average. And as mentioned, the initial slump in applications in April has been replaced with increases over the same period of last year. And just looking at income for 2019 to 20, that was actually above the targets. But for the current year, first half of the year, it's significantly down, as may be expected. Well, that's partly due to the pandemic, partly due to the delayed introduction of higher pre-application fees, which were due to be introduced in April. The introduction was put back to August, so there's a further higher target of £250,000 for the whole year was the requirement. We've not been able to achieve that as yet, which obviously impacts on the overall budget income. In terms of developer income at 3.3, Section 106 income was much lower than the £18 million for the previous year. Part of that's due to the timing of payments and trigger points for larger scale developments. It can fluctuate year on year quite significantly. And then for the first half of this current period, income's down to £176,000, which again is largely down to the impact of the pandemic. And in terms of SIL contributions, we received £6 million for the last full year, with the funds directed to education, as has become the normal pattern, but also this particular time it included flood alleviation. In terms of the construction industry overall, it led to significant difficulties from March onwards in terms of on-site delivery, which has led to deferment of payments of SIL for small and medium-sized businesses. So in the reporting period, we agreed 5 requests to defer SIL payments and also 5 requests to defer Section 106 payments, which were agreed on the basis of a 3-month deferment initially, and that was in line with government advice relating to the pandemic. So just moving on to decision making at 3.4, numbers coming into the authority were roughly the same as the previous year, but there was a big drop obviously in the first 2 quarters of the current year. And initially, as said before, applications couldn't be progressed because of the restrictions, and by the time the first lockdown ended, numbers had picked up dramatically, so there was a backlog of casework, and speed of decisions was did fall off quite significantly as well during that period. Turning to the work of plans panels for 2019 to 20, there was 74 decisions made by panels, along with other pre-application presentations and position statements considered. And as we know, since April, panels have operated remotely, but under the same constitutional rules, with the number of members and composition of panels remaining the same. In the first 2 quarters of this year, 20 decisions have been taken by panel. And as members know, initially panels were kept to 1 item per panel. But in recent months, that's increased as this way of operating has become more familiar, and we've been able to sort of resurrect business at panels. In the table, if you look at 3.5.2, that shows that in 2019 to 2020, from the 74 decisions taken, 5 were against officer recommendation, with 2 being dismissed, 1 appeal upheld, and the other still outstanding. And in the 6 months up to the end of September this year, we've had 1 decision against the recommendation out of the 20 that were considered. So just looking at appeals at 3.6, number of appeals for the full period, the full year, was slightly up on the previous year at 180 by the inspectorate, with a dismissal rate of 82.3, which was very high. And there have been 17 new appeals between April and September of this year. The performance has dropped off slightly for those 2 quarters, but remains still well above the national average of 67% dismissed. And as you'll see at 3.6.3, this does compare very well with core cities generally in terms of performance on appeals. So just looking at compliance and enforcement activity at 3.6, new case numbers remain very high, 1,316 as mentioned there. But during that full year, 2019 to 20, we actually resolved and closed more cases than we'd received, with ongoing caseload dropping to 858, which is well below the 1,000 upper limit that we set ourselves, which is the lowest for several years. Performance on timeliness of visits was similar to the previous year. Obviously, since April, with the lockdown prohibition initially on site visits and staff absences, that's massively impacted on performance. So the numbers of new cases coming into the authority that are outstanding has picked up quite markedly. Just on 3.7.6, that table should read 2019/20. That's just a slight error there, I think. And that shows 465 of the cases were found to involve no breach. Across the whole reporting period, that 11% of cases were found to involve very minor breaches of control. And in June to September of this year, the number of closed cases has increased markedly as site visits were able to resume again. And just looking at performance on formal notices, it shows for the previous full year quite a high level of activity, with 166 formal notices served, which, just looking at the background to this, it's actually more than Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle and Nottingham combined. So that's quite a significant achievement. But obviously, looking at the first 2 quarters of this year, with the lack of visits and inability to carry out visits, it's led to a very significant impact on our ability to serve formal notices so far. Just looking at complaints at 3.8, you'll see that the number of new complaints was significantly down from the previous full year by about a quarter. And that downward trend carried on into the first 2 quarters of the current year. Looking at ombudsman cases, there were 5 where fault was found. Issues were around communication, wording of standard conditions, and reminders have been issued to officers about processes and consultation documentation as well. So we're covering off any issues that arise from the Ombudsman. Just quickly turning to section 4 on staffing. On the planning application case officer side, the staffing was relatively stable during the initial full year period. Since April, there's been a number of instances of long-term sickness due to the impact of COVID and other restrictions. And on compliance, it was actually, again, a relatively stable year compared to previous years, with a small number of departures and arrivals of staff, and sickness levels were initially reducing, which was, as I've mentioned before, reflected in the reduction in the number of outstanding cases during the previous full year. But since April, again, we've had COVID-related absences of staff and some staff reallocated to other duties to help with the council's tackling of the pandemic, which has impacted on the ability to resolve casework. going forward. Just moving on to service improvement work, then certainly prior to the pandemic, we had launched into quite a number of service improvements. One example was the engagement with the customer base of householder applications. So it's the agents that we met in March, with new processes introduced and discussed at that meeting. And in terms of officer training and help and improvements, I will note that set up the introduction of a climate change or climate emergency steering officer
Jonathan,
group.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Jonathan, can I just interrupt you for a moment? We're getting
Certainly.
some background noise. I wonder if I could ask colleagues to just check if they're muted, because we're getting some chattering going on in the background and it's just slightly distracting.
Okay.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank
Please
you.
continue.
Okay. So I'm just wondering where I've got to now. So I think I've got onto the service improvements, haven't I?
Sorry.
Yeah.
You have, yes.
Sorry, Chair.
It's my fault. It's my fault, Jonathan. I interrupted you.
Okay, I'm just on service improvements. So I was just talking about the officer improvements in terms of us setting up a climate emergency steering officer group to ensure that staff across planning services are kept up to date with the response to the climate emergency and to assist in implementation of existing policies. And then in terms of member training, we had a relatively full programme for 2019 to 20 with courses on design, student housing, trees and planting, and access and inclusion, alongside the yearly planning law update, which was held back in, I think it was November of last year. The report refers to the new SharePoint site that's been developed for members. It brings together useful information and access to guidance just in one place. This is being further developed over the next few months to act as a self-service point for members, and it will also include detailed information on Section 106 contributions as well, which is often asked for. So following on from the agents conference back in March that I mentioned, we've adopted a protocol for dealing with householder applications to try and streamline that process and to ensure that time spent on each householder application is proportionate to that type of submission. The agents were largely agreeable to this, actually, and it helps to provide them with more certainty as to the approach that will be adopted and ultimately to quicker decision making, but without reducing the quality of the decisions made, which is reflected in the appeals record, which we'll come on to. Just looking at the challenges then at section 6, obviously the biggest immediate challenge for the service is the budget deficit faced by the council and the service's contribution to addressing that deficit. An external review was carried out over the summer period, and that highlighted two main areas for consideration. Those were potential improvements to existing systems and processes to modernise how we deal with planning processes and try and, wherever possible, digitise them, but also to look at the decision-making process and the governance of decision-making to try and reduce the resources input to panels. Again, the intention is to maintain performance and delivery, but at a reduced cost base. This increases income by ensuring that discretionary advice service in terms of pre-application advice can be appropriately resourced, which gives a sort of a virtuous circle of providing timely advice, which encourages more fee-generating inquiries to be made. So these recommendations on the review will be explored over the next few months, and proposals will be put forward, which look to put us in a more robust position going forward, as the budget challenges will no doubt continue for future years. So the digital agenda will be further developed with lessons learnt from the current working conditions. Since the end of September, since the end of the reporting period talked about here, we've actually seen a number of senior staff retiring, experienced staff. So we do have an immediate challenge of workloads and resourcing to take account of prior to the full review taking effect. We've mentioned here the white paper, which I'm sure many members will be aware of, Planning for the Future, which is widely described, I think, as the biggest shake-up of planning since 1947. And it's been subject to lots of debate and criticism. And we do expect it to evolve and change quite markedly, actually, as it progresses, but it will still, no doubt, still result in a fundamental shift to the planning system overall, which would clearly impact on us as a service. And the Council's response to the white paper is attached to Appendix 1 for members' interest. Just at 6.2.1, there's a spelling mistake. It should say codes and not cods, I think, at that point, just to point that out. 6.3, so that summarises the issues that I've talked about in terms of resourcing and budgets, explains the delays to implementation of the higher pre-app fees and the pressure on existing budgets, and sets out there needs to be changes in the way the service is delivered to ensure that we are meeting our statutory obligations and requirements, and also to generate income that's needed to keep the service going forward in the future. So just really to conclude, just to say that the performance of development management does remain good, but budget challenges and issues stemming from the pandemic have created a backlog of casework, both in planning applications and compliance, which has meant it's been a very challenging period for the last 6 months at least. The focus is on maintaining the quality of output for planning decisions and in compliance, and ensuring that we do remain sort of policy compliant with our decision making, but also have an eye on ensuring that we are contributing to the climate emergency concerns. And just again to reiterate, to do this, we will need to conduct a review which introduces changes to how we operate as a service, and bearing in mind the government's proposals for changing planning in the future, in the not too distant future. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully that was a bit of a long run through, but relatively short compared to the length of the report itself.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. That was very helpful. Just a couple of technical points. I can definitely hear voices in the background, and it sounds as if there might be another meeting going on somewhere that's clashing with ours. Debbie,
Chair,
could you try and... Yeah.
Chair, I think it might be actually from Jonathan's own, from the background at Jonathan's own house.
Ah, thank you.
It's probably me, Chair. We share an office here, so it's unavoidable that there will be occasions when there is a clash of meetings.
That explains it. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And secondly, I have had a signal on my screen to say that my connection is weak. So, Councillor McKenna, be on the lookout. If I disappear, you may be needed. And if that does happen, I will go and sit next to Peter's screen, and therefore will still be present. Okay, so can I invite comments, questions, points of view, or anything else on this report, please, from members? I've got Councillor Nash first.
Right, Elizabeth Nash, Hounslow and Riverside. On page 27, you've only just mentioned it about the planning white paper, and we have prepared a response anyway. But what about the Local Government Association? They like to get involved with things like that. Have we contacted them? And I'm quite sure they would want to speak on behalf of all local authorities. Okay.
Chair, David Feeney speaking. Can I come back on that point?
Please do.
Thank you, Councillor Nash. Just to confirm, yes, we are in touch with the LGA. There's been a few practitioners groups that we've sat on in response to various topics along the way. So we are plugging into the LGA and raising our concerns through that route, just to reassure you.
Thank you. Do you want to come back, Councillor Nash? I think I've lost sound, actually. I can't hear anyone.
We can hear you.
Oh, you've come back.
Myself. No.
Oh, that's why. Sorry, that explains it. Sorry. Would you like to come back, Councillor Nash?
No.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks, Chair. Bramley and Stanley Ward. I don't think I introduced myself last time, so forgive me for that. Yeah, just on page 23 or 22, 23, about the cases, enforcement cases, and there's a referral to the members' ward updates, which are really helpful, but there is something lacking with those, which I'd like to be put on record and corrected. We don't always get updates when cases are closed. So I noticed cases just disappeared off subsequent updates without any confirmation that they'd been closed. And it's helps us to keep a track on things if we're updated rather than having to go look for information about specific cases. So if you could let us know when cases are closed and removed off that list, please, going forward. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's certainly something we'll go and have a look at and see how easy it is to do that, and with a mind to ensuring that members are informed. Is it cases where members have shown a particular interest or generated themselves, or all cases that you'd be interested in knowing about?
So all the cases that ever appear on our spreadsheet, on our updates, when the cases are closed for whatever reason, it needs acknowledging on the subsequent update.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Collins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Collins, Horsforth Ward. I think I failed to announce myself last time as well. There doesn't seem to be any detail in here about enforcement and prosecutions regarding TPOs and works to trees in conservation areas. I assume it's just lumped in with all of the other numbers, but is there any way that we could get detail about what the council is doing regarding protecting our mature trees? I was quite disappointed the other day when I was talking to quite an active member of our community, and he actually said he wouldn't bother reporting anyone doing damage to trees anymore because the council was very ineffective. That wasn't quite his wording, but ineffective at taking things forward and doing anything about it. And the council appeared not to care. So I don't know whether officers would like to comment on that and let us know if there's some more further detail they can give us regarding the statistics.
Yes. Thank you. Through you, Chair, again.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that we could look to supply. Maybe an item for our SharePoint site, just to keep members up to date on the live situation with numbers of cases per sort of in relation to trees or other types of breach. But again, we are heavily reliant on the tree service for taking action with regard to impact upon trees. So we need to take that back as a comment, I think, to look at
thank you.
the sort of efficiency of that particular element of the service.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by saying an excellent report, Jonathan, very easy to follow and understand. Thank you for that. My not concerned, but I'd like to highlight 5.2 members training, 5.2.1. We haven't had members training for a long time, and now that we're efficient, and that's probably too big a word, but usually we function online. It does seem to me that there are some councillors who've probably only had one training session, and that's a good time ago. Even old crusties like myself and some of the other members would welcome the training resuming. So I think that's really important. So I'd like to see that happen online early in the new year if we can, please, John.
Thank you, and I would certainly endorse that point, Councillor McKenna. Jonathan?
Yes, as I said, we did have quite a full programme for the last year prior to the pandemic, but given that things have bedded in terms of electronic working, I think it's probably something we can seek to reintroduce for the current year. We normally tend to have a planning law update in the November-December period, which hasn't happened this year either, so we probably are overdue for further training for members So we'll take that comment on board. And,
yes, I think we are, because we have a program. Carry on, Jonathan, sorry.
No, it's fine, Chair. I was just going to add that the report was largely prepared by Helen Sarotti, so I can't take much credit for the clarity of content.
Yeah, I do agree with that point on training. We've had compulsory training in previous years, so we must be overdue some of that compulsory training that keeps us up to date with the planning framework, etc. So yes, I would also urge that we get on with a session or two of those important briefings. Councillor Gruen, Peter.
Chair, thank you very much. I echo the comments about the excellence of the report. Very readable. I hope sufficiently in plain English for everybody, but it's a good report. My first comment is on para 613, item 2. I urge colleagues to read this. The suggestion is that because of a lack of resources, there might be fewer applications coming to panel. I would resist that very strongly. In fact, I think possibly the opposite is the case. You know, we should look at the cutoff point very carefully, and there should always be a mechanism where ward members who are not part of the planning process, and that's most of the council, and you're defending their right here, not just your own right. Most of the council, the only access to panel is quite often through an appeal mechanism of wanting to get things to come to panel. So I would jealously guard the fact that we need to have those controversial and those topical items still come to panel. And the second comment I would like to make is on the planning white paper. I recognise the reference was written before the latest announcements by the Secretary of State. And not necessarily wanting to comment on the detail, but express a disappointment, a sense of disappointment that we haven't all as planning members been able to contribute to a response or even had the latest information. I recognise again it's all additional work, but some of this work you'll have done for the executive member, for plans chairs. You've got 3 plans panels, and we could have actually had a better feel and a better response from, if I call us rank and file members of plans panels, than we've been able to have. So please accept these as constructive criticisms, if you wish, because overall, as you know, I think you do a tremendous job, and these statistics bear that out. And thank you very much for all you do.
Thank you, Peter. David, did you want to pick this one up, or Jonathan?
Well, I'll pick up the point, a couple of points, Chair, if I may. I mean, on the work of the panels, I mean, clearly we are looking at our work streams in the round in terms of the volume of material coming through the system and our back office systems to try and make that as efficient as possible. And we're certainly not seeking to prevent opportunities for items to go to panel to have the rigorous discussion that we've been used to. I think the work we're talking about is looking at the systems end to end to find out where the efficiencies lie, and also enable us to free up some capacity within the service to help with the income generation work, which is what we need to do in terms of meeting our income targets. So that's sort of the context for that particular point. In terms of the consultation, I mean, it's a fair comment that Councillor Gruen has made about sort of the dissemination of responses. I think just by way of context here, I mean, we're in a period where there's been a flurry of government announcements and consultation documents. Some changes have just been introduced without any consultation. Some changes have been proposed with fairly short consultation periods, and other changes have been run out over a longer period. So you know, we are trying to keep up with the announcements and the changes coming through. But we can circulate responses more widely if that would be helpful where they've been prepared, Chair.
I think we would find that helpful. I'm just looking around to see if people are nodding, but I think we would. People who haven't had exposure to that information would find that useful. Peter, do you want to come back?
Well, thank you for saying that. I clearly do think it is informative, but you might also actually, in all humility, you might pick up some ideas and comments from other planning members that hadn't surfaced by then. On the first point, I recognize from everything you say very diplomatically about planning resources and the unprecedented position the council is in. But the answer is not to take less for public scrutiny. I think that's the point I'm making. Improve efficiency and all that, yes, of course. But member involvement actually is part of the integrity and the conscience of our planning system. And we do very well in Leeds. And so let's keep that up, please.
I've lost Peter's voice. Can people still hear me?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So I've noticed Jonathan's put his hand up. Is it on this item, Jonathan? Because I do have Councillor Jenkins waiting.
Sorry,
and
Chair,
Councillor Anderson.
It was just to respond to the point regarding the work of plans panels and to say that the proposals don't propose any change to the constitution in terms of the exceptions to the scheme of delegation. So there wouldn't be a sort of diminishing of the perhaps, for example, the right to a ward member to call in an application, or for those exceptions to be reduced in any way. It's more about making sure that they are applied rigorously and that we operate in an efficient manner, as David's alluded to earlier. Just to make that point, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Peter, do you want to come back?
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay,
I don't need to come back, no.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Anderson, please.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlan Wharfdale Ward. As a suggestion for some members' training, until I read paragraph 5.3, I wasn't aware that we had this SharePoint facility. So I wouldn't have thought I'd be the only person who doesn't. So it might be worthwhile having a training course as to how we can use it and how we can make best use of it, so that the officers that are putting stuff on can see the benefits and we can understand the benefits of it. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Barry. Jonathan?
Yes, that's certainly something I'll share with Helen, who's largely put together this piece of work, and I'm sure she'd be more than happy if members were made much more aware of the benefits that it can bring to accessibility of issues. So yes, certainly something we'll look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Jenkins next.
Hi, it's Councillor David Jenkins from Killingbeck and Seacroft. This is maybe another item for training. One of the issues that we come up against in new developments is the problem of secured by design. And because I think secured by design is about 30 years old as a concept, maybe it needs updating, because a lot of the time with developments, it seems to be insecured by design or unsecured by design. So issues like having chicanes and to stop motorbikes going through estates and traffic calming measures and so on. So I wonder if we could have some sort of discussion with the police and new developments where people have experience of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Jonathan, do you want to come back on that?
Just to say it's a very good suggestion, which we can explore with the architectural liaison officer and bring forward. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I don't see any more hands at the moment. Is there anybody else wishing to speak before we move on? I just have one comment, actually, David or Jonathan, and that's at 733 on the climate emergency. It actually says there are no direct implications for this report, but this report is reporting on a year's work, and we've done a lot of work on climate emergency in terms of policy development, training, discussion, presentations, and I would have, given the significance of the issue, I would have expected actually that there would have been climate change reference in this report.
Thank you, Chair. I can come back on that. I don't think that's very good drafting, is it, the way it's been presented? I think earlier in the report it does describe the work we're leading on in terms of the cross-service work, in terms of taking forward the climate emergency, which is higher up the report. I think the intention of how it's explained in 733 is, I think it's about performance in the general sense of the throughput of work and those issues, rather than the policy issues per se, but perhaps it could be stronger there to make those links. So that's something we can look at for next time.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I haven't seen any more hands go up on this issue. So unless you'd like to make any final comments, Jonathan, we can move on to the next item. You okay to move on?
I'm fine to move on. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay. Can we note the report then, please, members? That's the recommendation. I'll take silence as agreement to that. Thank you. Agenda item 9, we're on the buildings at risk item. I can see that Phil is in attendance, so can I hand it over to you, Phil, please?
Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry, I should have said, we have, since the publication of this report, had an update on Tower Works, which I think you're going to take into account in your presentation.
Yes, I am. Yes, thank you. And
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for asking me to introduce the annual report on buildings at risk. Just a reminder, a building at risk is a listed building at risk from neglect and decay, rather than at risk from alteration. The global picture is that there are 112 buildings at risk. The buildings at risk are in the register at the back of the report, which represents 4.4% of the just short of 2,500 listed buildings in the city. 4 buildings at risk have been removed from the register. They're in the appendix at the back of the report, because they've been repaired and are considered no longer to be at risk. And I'll go over a few of those later on. 3 listed buildings have been added to the register. This is almost certainly an underestimation of the number, because our intelligence is largely based on site visits, and we've almost stopped doing site visits during the pandemic. So I think the true picture will be that a few more listed buildings have become at risk since the last report. Unfortunately, the council owns 15 buildings at risk, which is disproportionate. So that's to say that the council owns disproportionately too many listed buildings. 15 buildings at risk is 16.8% of the total 112 buildings at risk, but the council doesn't own 16.8% of listed buildings. So the council's performance isn't good on that. I will go at the end of this introduction. I will go into what the council is doing about that. I'm often asked when I present these reports about owners' liabilities in relation to listed buildings and keeping them in good repair. There is actually no liability on owners to keep their buildings in good repair. The council has various powers to take action in default. So what happens is we serve a notice on the owner, and if the owner doesn't do the repairs by a specified date, then we can step in and do repairs. But of course, we need a budget to do that, and money is hard to come by at the moment. And we haven't served any buildings at risk notices since the last report. I'll come on to the particulars now, and talk about some individual buildings at risk. The big three, this is a term that's been bandied around for quite a few years. These are the buildings at risk that we focused most of our attention on. And it is an action by the whole council to do something about these buildings, and they are the first White Cloth Hall. There's a picture of that at the back of the report, and anybody who goes down there on Kergate, I'd recommend it, can see what has happened. And I think you'll be surprised. Since that photograph was taken, things have moved on quite a lot, and we're expecting that building will be finished March, April next year, which will be great news. Hunslet Mill, the first phase is complete, and please do go down there and have a look. You'll see the great progress, and the developer is about to start on phase 2, which includes the magnificent Grade 2 star listed building against the canal. The other one to mention is Tower Works, and as Councillor Gruen said, I'd like to say a bit more about that. If you went down there, you probably think nothing is happening. Well, that is not the case. Since CG bought the building 3 years ago, they've invested approximately £3.5 million on repairs. In fact, they've just installed some roof lights, which involve craning them in from adjoining land. And there's been continuing investigation to work out how to get to the point where it's safe to get inside. It's structurally complex, but I think we understand it now. To go out and get a contractor to do some further works, which will cost about £5 million just to get to that whole point, so we can get inside and do further work, and eventually stabilise the building. You may have read that the Chancellor of Exchequer has dedicated £25 million to the repair of this building, to establish the British Library for the North, which would be absolutely fantastic. So just going on again about some specifics. Majestic, there's a picture at the back of the report. You probably all know, you might have seen that has been complete. It will be the headquarters for Channel 4. This time last year, it was still a building at risk, and it's, what we've achieved there is absolutely fantastic. A great blending of new and old, which I'm very proud of. The two buildings at risk at Cookridge Hospital have been repaired for residential use. One is an extra care facility. Again, these were derelict listed buildings. It just shows what you can do with a bit of imagination. Hyroids has been finished. It's been a long journey, and all of the listed building is now occupied. Enelil Upton on Headingley Lane, if you drive past now, you'll see that there's a scaffold up, and works are underway to remove the graffiti and carry out weatherproofing and removal of dry rot. So that's a great step forward since last year. Mount St Mary's, there was a position paper to members a few weeks ago, and we'll be coming back, I think, for the application to be determined, and hopefully that will deliver a new residential development in a building at risk that needs a new use. St John's Roundhay, that's on the market, and hopefully we'll get a new occupier for that building. Stonebridge Mills, work has started on that one, and the repair of the listed building is tied to the residential development, i.e. there's a break point, and after which they'll have to have finished the refurbishment of the listed building, which is what we did at Cookridge Hospital. They could only build out 75% of the houses before they repaired the listed building, so that's been very successful. Just say a bit about council-owned buildings. The first annual report, which is 2012, we had 18 buildings at risk in council ownership. Now we've got 16. I expect that this will decrease with the accelerated disposal of council assets. So this time next year, I think that number will have decreased. On the other hand, the budget that we had to repair historic buildings has been suspended because of the council's financial pressures, which may lead to the deterioration of some of the council's buildings. Just to conclude, the ongoing survey of the city's listed buildings has shown that the number of buildings at risk has decreased since the last report and accounts for 4.4% of the 2,500 buildings in the city. The council is actively involved in the majority of buildings at risk, which has resulted in 4 listed buildings being repaired and brought back into use since the last report in 2019. Intervention by the council is being prioritised with a focus on the big 3, where significant progress has been made. The number of council-owned buildings at risk has remained largely the same as 2019, but the planned disposal of several properties should show a marked reduction by the next report in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil, for that very interesting report. We're always very interested in this part of the meeting, and that was very well presented. Thank you. So I've got Councillor Hamilton who wants to come in first, and then I've got Councillor Khan and Councillor Nash and Councillor Collins.
Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Meanwood and Moortown Ward. Just a minor error on 3.2.3 Mount St Mary's. I think it should say 1980s if you look at the date. Right, my question was regarding building at risk, when you said, Phil, that the owners can't force them to repair their buildings. However, the council can step in, and we don't have the funding. However, is it buildings that are danger at risk to public and safety that we would repair?
Thanks for pointing out the error. It's amazing you can reread these things and still miss things like that. It was pretty glaring.
There's a couple I've noticed, but not just yours.
Dear. Oh dear.
Not just yours, but I didn't say.
Apologise. Yes, I mean, the council has various powers. There are powers under the Building Act, which allows us to step in and make buildings safe. The powers we've got under the Listed Building Act are distinct and allow us to do a bit more than that. It allows us to make buildings weatherproof and safe, and also to stop intruders. So the powers under the Listed Building Act are more extensive.
Okay.
Sometimes we use the powers in combination because the powers under the Listing Act won't necessarily remove the public, the threat to public safety. So we have to use them in combination.
Thank you. Have you finished, Phil?
I think so. Yes. I don't think I've got anything to add.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, Councillor Hamilton, do you want to comment on that or come back?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Khan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Asghar Khan, Birmingham, Tottenham, Richmond Award. On page 62, Mount St Mary's Church is in Birmingham, Tottenham, Richmond Award, the ward I represent with my 2 other colleagues. And we welcome this building, this church, back into development, back into use. But what I feel and my other colleagues feel is because when we ask the developers to bring the sites back into use, we're giving in too much. There's no green space, there's no SIL money, there's no Section 106 as well. And also, there's always site developments taking place first, and that building's left over, and they'll turn around and say, sorry, we don't have a fund. Till we get some more funding, we will get that site back up in use. But for instance, if developers are not making any money from that development, what we should be doing is putting some conditions on. Once that development is fully occupied, start making some money, then we should be getting that money into those wards and into those areas. That's one. The other one is, Phil, it's, by the way, it's a brilliant report. Before we used to have like ISO sites as well within these reports. ISO sites had been disappeared, and there are some sites within our wards that are attracting antisocial behaviour, nuisance. And is there any way we can start enforcing those sites as well, please?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes those ISOs are listed buildings. I'm afraid to say. Other sites are a bit beyond my remit, and I wonder whether David Feeney would like to comment on that, about ISO sites more generally, vacant sites, for instance.
Thank you.
Could I bring Jonathan or David in on that, please?
I think, thank you, Chair. I think we just need to establish what the sites are and their current status. It might be their sites that currently have a planning consent that is, waiting to start, or it could be for some other reason. So I think it's just understanding what the sites are and perhaps the ownership of those sites, and understand if any action is already being taken. So I'm happy to have a separate discussion, Councillor Khan, with you if that would be helpful on those particular sites.
Yes, and if it would be helpful just to me to say that the ISO sites scheme was a scheme, I think, that preceded yourself, David, certainly in your current role. So you might not have been aware of it when it came up, but it was a scheme where members were encouraged to identify sites that were ISOs within their ward. And bring them to the attention of the planning group, and draw plans or aspirations for those sites. There are two such in my ward. One was a derelict pub, and the other was a derelict car park, I think, both of which are now successfully converted into housing. So if that helps with the background, that's great. Thank you. Councillor Khan, do you want to come back on any of the thing? No.
I think you're on mute, Councillor Khan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. That's better. Yeah. Yes, David. We've got one site. It's in Harehills and Gipton, but it's looking to Birmingham ward. It's the Compton Road. Compton Arms pub used to be. What the owner's done is demolished that pub, and it's causing quite a few antisocial behaviour. And we've got other partners working in the area. And it's been working for a long time, David. But there's other sites as well. We'll have another conversation outside this meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Asghar. Councillor Nash.
I think we've all got our names under our photographs, so the public can see who we are. That's right. Anyway, yes. Firstly, a comment, and as Phil has alluded to, the best way of preserving buildings is to have them occupied. And I was going to comment on that on the previous report. But if buildings are left unoccupied, then they very soon deteriorate, whether they suffer from vandalism or just water ingress that we are unaware of, because who knows if a roof is leaking unless there's an obvious hole in it. And unfortunately, the council does own a number of these buildings which are unoccupied. So quite frankly, I welcome the fact that the council is now trying to sell them, because listed buildings which are converted to housing make very desirable and saleable properties. There's just two other things, and I think I mentioned this ages ago, years ago. Some of the listed buildings which are in council ownership are not buildings, they're small memorials and plaques. And I did suggest that perhaps local councillors may have some local funds, maybe local sale money, that they can use to repair or restore whatever it is. And thirdly, I am concerned that there are a number of buildings about which are not listed and they're not suffering any damage, but I would like them to be listed for protection for the future. And I notice, for example, that on 67 at the bottom, there's Burley Branch Library, which is a listed building in council ownership, built at the same time and in the same style is Hunslet Library. Now, the previous council wanted to pull it down, and we in Hunslet stuck up for this building. And at the time we had some RATS money and we did quite a bit of refurbishment as soon as Labour took control again. That was one of the first jobs that happened. Now the council has put a lot of money into Hunslet Library and it is a hub, and it's been beautifully restored and opened up. It's a real pleasure to go inside. But when it was under threat, I did inquire about getting this building listed, and it was just a blank wall all the time. I would still like that building to be listed in case some Philistines take over in the future and have got other plans for that area. But I'm sure throughout Leeds, there are buildings which should be listed. They may be of architectural or local interest, but they should be on the list of listed buildings. So that's all I have to say, but I should be glad of your comments about the latter two things.
Thank you, Councillor Nash. Are you able to comment on that, Phil, please?
Yeah, just on buildings that should be listed. Listing is administered by Historic England, and they have their criteria, and the criteria really don't sort of reflect local belonging and attachment to buildings. So what we're doing, if you like, instead or as well as, is locally listing buildings. We're putting together a list of locally listed buildings right at the beginning of that, which at least will alert the planners if an application is made to demolish them. They'll know that this building is considered to be locally listed, and that needs to be weighed in the balance when a decision is made. So it will give them some protection in the planning process. And certainly Hunslet Library would be one of those locally listed buildings. A lot of the branch libraries, I mean, we've got a great legacy of branch libraries in Leeds, all different styles, but the ones that were built in the 30s and later in the 50s are fantastic, and those that aren't listed nationally will be on the local list.
Chair,
On any points?
Yes, I'm glad to hear that, but I don't think it's quite good enough. Hunslet Library is exactly the same style, the same period, the same architecture as Burley Library, and yet Burley Library is listed and Hunslet isn't. And Hunslet, I invite all panel members to go and visit it. It's absolutely magnificent, but who knows what may happen in the future. And I don't understand why Burley got on the list. And there's other libraries, like, for example, Compton Road, which should be listed and may be under threat. So I don't understand why we can't have this on a national list.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Liz. Phil, are you able to have a short meeting with Liz outside this meeting on that issue, specifically to do with Hunslet?
I'd be delighted to. Yes, we'll set some.
We are supposed to have regular meetings, but since COVID happened, they've gone by the by. I am the heritage champion for the city.
Yeah, we'll
okay.
We'll get that meeting, Councillor. We've been trying to set this up for a few weeks, haven't we?
Well made point, Liz. Thank you very much indeed. And perhaps you might like to feed back to us informally, Liz, when you've had that meeting. Thank you. Councillor Collins?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things now, I'm afraid. Phil just mentioned the locally listed buildings plan. It'd be nice if we could have a little bit further information about that at a later date, because I think it's a very good idea, and there's buildings in our ward that we'd probably like to go on that list. So that's the first point. The second point is, which was the main reason I wanted to talk, the buildings at risk register is very helpful, but it leaves me asking more questions. And I just wondered, when you put a property or an item or whatever on the list, is there a report behind it that actually says what the officers are concerned about, what they think the issue is with that building? Because if we could apply for to see the information behind those items, I think it would help us as ward members to then focus on that property, and if opportunities did come up where we could assist in taking it off the list because we could get some work done, I'm sure we would all do that. So is there information behind these reference numbers that we could be copied in on, please?
Yes, there is, Councillor. For each buildings at risk, there's a survey report that was filled out when the surveyor went out to look at the building. This report you can't contain all that information for obvious reasons, because it would go on for hundreds of pages. But what we're doing is slowly uploading all that information to the Geographical Information System, GIS, which will make that information available, and also photographs, and also update on repair and reuse.
In the meantime,
thank you.
Copies. Sorry.
I can certainly, if you want to send me a list of those buildings that you're interested in, I can send you a mini report on each of them and include photographs.
Lovely. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, please.
Just briefly, it was a point that Phil made about paragraph 3.3.3 about having to suspend the council-owned heritage asset programme. Outside of this meeting, I'm asking you to do it just now, can you give me an update on the effect that this is going to have on the adult reformatory? And to Mr. Feeney, can you get whichever planner it is that's carrying out the pre-app discussions with the potential purchasers of the site to give me an update on it? Because if we get the application going, we won't need to spend money on investing in it. So it's just we get the balance right. It's not that I'm being critical. It's just so that I can understand where it is. Because if the application doesn't go ahead, it will then come on to Mr. Ward to protect it. If we can get the application going, it will then fall to the prospective purchasers to get it brought up to grade 2 standard again. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
Yes, I'll follow up with a report that details investment in the building, and will also include an update on where we are with the planning application and disposal.
Thank you. And I've got Councillor Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor David Blackburn, Farley and Wortley, better introduce himself. There's three things. Firstly, if I can comment on what Councillor Nash was talking about listing. I've got to agree with it. Is that there's sort of oddities when it comes to listing. I can remember a beautiful villa house that at the top of an hill in my ward that former Councillor Bedford and I tried to get listed, and we were told, oh, we can't list it because there's plenty of villa houses such as that throughout the Leeds district. Well, as I say, that was a point that could be seen from Huddersfield railway line as you were coming into Leeds. You know, it was gorgeous. And the thing is there's inconsistencies there, and there's some buildings that's probably listed that shouldn't be. So I've got every sympathy with her. But going back to the report, and we mentioned Stonebridge Mill, I've got to say I was very, very happy to see vehicles going onto the site and making a start the other week. I know we've had an update from planning officers about how things are moving forward. I went to a meeting with the owner of Stonebridge Mills some 22 years ago. And I've been wanting something decent doing there for all that time. And at last we've got something going. And I think when we get that development, that's going to enhance the area and make Stonebridge Mills a wonderful building once again. You know, that's part of our heritage. And then the third point I wanted to mention was, and it's not on the list, not in the report, but I'll just sort of flag it up at the moment. And could we arrange to have a meeting outside of this regarding the former Farnley Hill Methodist Church, where my ward colleagues have raised recently issues to do with that. That's a listed building, and it's got a listed interior with box pews, and there are some serious concerns about that. So come outside of this meeting, can you contact us? That's all.
Thanks. Their comments were fairly self-explanatory, so Phil might just want to come in on the last point and agree that action that David has suggested.
Agreed. I'll be in touch early in the new year to have that meeting.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Phil. I don't see any more hands. I think that's a historic David Blackburn hand. No. So can I move us to the recommendation, which again is just to note the report, and I'll just take silence as agreement that we've noted it. Thank you. So now we're moving on to agenda item 10, which is the Council Housing Growth Programme. And this is going to be presented by Mark Denton. So Mark, it's over to you.
Thanks, Councillor Green. Hopefully you can hear me. I did have some IT problems earlier, so fingers crossed everything will be all right. And good afternoon to all the members at this meeting. I'm Mark Denton, Head of the Council Housing Growth Service. I will just give you a very brief introduction to the report, which you've hopefully had a chance to have a look at. I hope it's a good update in terms of the programme, showing good progress, but identifying that there still remains some major challenges ahead in terms of the council's aspirations to deliver a significant council housing programme. The report sets out the context in which we're delivering housing. Leeds is a very successful city in terms of the number of new homes being built, but I think there's a recognition that there is a shortage in particular of affordable housing. So that's not just the council itself as a direct provider contributing to that, but also the work of registered housing providers, and then also through the various other channels in which affordable housing is provided. But the numbers vary from year to year, but there is a significant shortfall each year in terms of the number of new affordable housing homes being delivered. And whilst we've got our own target of delivering 300 new homes each year, so 1,500 new homes hopefully by around 2023-24, that there is a need to really do everything possible to try and bring sites forward and to make the programme meet those targets. From the report, you can see that significant resources have been committed since the abolition of the cap on the housing revenue account in 2018. At that time, we were looking at a programme of around 350 homes. We're now, as you can see, up to a programme which is just over 800 homes. So it's taken some time to actually get schemes to a point where they're into planning and on site, which is fairly typical in terms of development and an area that we're looking to try and accelerate. But hopefully that you can see is a really big level of growth in a relatively short space of time. The programme benefits from the multidisciplinary team that we have there. So we have great support within the wider City Development Directorate, but from colleagues that are on the call today in terms of David's planning department, and also in terms of Phil with the design input that we get from his team. And the report I've shared with you today kind of highlights previous executive board reports where progress has been reported. The main issues I just really wanted to touch on, I guess, is that there's a significant waiting list still. There's over 23,000 people currently on the council's housing waiting list. We're delivering 800 homes at the moment. We're in the process of doing that as part of that target, but there is a real shortage of land and sites. And so, you know, I kind of picking up on some of the comments that have been made on the early reports. We have got a number of larger sites that we're delivering at the moment, but we're also looking as we move into the next year to see how we can deliver some of the smaller, more difficult sites that are there. Most of the sites we are involved with are complex or have significant regeneration or contamination issues, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. Against that shortage of land and our programme targets, we're still losing around 600 homes each year to the Right to Buy programme. That generates receipts, but we're on a very tight timescales in terms of having to commit those and then being at risk of being repaid to the government if we don't commit them. So again, that's highlighted as a risk within the report that's been presented to you today. I appreciate there's a lot of issues and it's hard to cover everything, and I don't want to take up a lot of members' time, but we've tried to highlight some of the work we're doing to lead with quality, design, put in place and people, thinking about the tenants and the communities that the schemes are placed in. At the same time, trying to do that within affordability that looks at people's incomes, not just affordability and housing allowance thresholds. There's a bit about climate change and biodiversity, which again is a great part of the agenda and another pressure to contend with when also dealing with all the issues in terms of kind of making sites developable at high standards. We do our very best to engage and work with local members. I know it's not always easy, and there's sometimes questions about where consultation ends and information starts, and that may well be an issue that is discussed, but there is a ward member engagement strategy, and we work within that and try and work to that. And hopefully one of the things that we'll increasingly see is even more communications as the programme moves forward into more construction during 21. Last couple of things, there are a number of risks that are listed at para 4.6. That they are challenges to any development programme. We're no different from anybody else, but hopefully members can see that, you know, if you look at the balance in the table, which sets out the 800 units, more and more of those schemes are heading into planning or will be on site during 2021 onwards. So I'll stop at that point, Chair, and if there's any questions or comments that members wish to make, that to present the report to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark. A very useful, helpful insight into the development of that programme. Just looking at hands, Councillor Nash and then Councillor Ritchie wants to come in. Councillor Nash first, please.
All right, thank you. Yes, it was a very helpful report and I certainly will be making use of it. But for years now, instead of talking about houses, we talk about housing or homes. And as we know, developers love to build flats because they can make more money from flats. And there is a great shortage of houses for families. So I wonder if you could look at that, please, and identify how many require houses compared with how many desire flats. And I think you'll find that not many people ask for flats. Thank you.
Mark.
Would you like me to kind of respond to each of the questions in turn, Chair?
Yes, please, if you would. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. We work very closely with our housing management colleagues to decide on the best mix within each scheme. planning as well sets parameters in terms of local needs that should be addressed to try and ensure we produce a balanced place. And I have to say that the majority of the schemes that we look at have a big component on family housing. There are sites that are more challenging. They're quite often smaller, where we often look at a higher density solution in order to actually get the sites developed, because a small number of houses doesn't kind of help. It's very difficult to achieve an economically, financially viable scheme on those sites, and the choice could potentially then be that we wouldn't be able to develop them at all. In every area, we work with housing, and we do produce the statistics, and we can do that, but there is a very large number of single person and small household demand across the city. So whilst we won't be building just lots of high density schemes, we are certainly looking at high density schemes as well, because we do need to maximise the assets that we can obtain. But we always try and work both with housing management and with local members around achieving a balance and the right scheme. But viability is a major concern.
Well,
okay,
if I may say, I'm glad to hear you say that, but that has not been our experience in the past. In fact, when a new estate was built in Hunslet, it meant clearing away flats which had fallen into disrepair because elderly people didn't want them anymore, and to build more high density housing. Fine, but my colleagues and I had a devil of a job to reduce the number of flats which were proposed, and we couldn't get it fully housing. We still had to take some flats whether we wanted them or not, but we did have quite a fight to get more houses built on the site. So I'm glad to hear what you're saying, but I'm a bit skeptical whether you do take into account ward members' comments. I'm sorry about that, but that's a fact, and that's experience. And I'm still having a discussion, only on a very small site, but there's a proposal to build flats, and I want houses. But because you can build more flats, then that it's going to be flats, whether we want them or not. And as a member, I have never ever been asked, apart from once, on one occasion in over 40 years, been asked to help with procuring a flat. They've all been houses, overcrowding, substandard housing. They want decent family houses. So I've said my piece.
Thanks. Okay, thank you, Liz. I think what you've said is largely for officers to note, but I will just offer them the opportunity to come back on that if they wish to.
Councillor Green, I'm happy to provide a breakdown of the programme so far in terms of the mix between houses and flats. I'm happy to provide that, because it will show that the substantial number of new homes we're producing are family homes. We're also meeting the needs in terms of M43 and fully wheelchair compliant properties, sometimes in addition to policy requirements. So as I say, I cannot guarantee that every site we build on will not contain flats, and some of them will have to have flats or high density schemes in order to be viable, or they will never get built because nobody else will come forward to do them.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate that, and I think it would be helpful to circulate what you're referring to, and then members can pick it up with you outside the meeting if they wish to continue that discussion. So thank you very much indeed. Councillor Ritchie.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've got 2 points. The first one, and it might be more for the planning officers, David, on our sort of strategy. So in section 3 under the main issues, the first 2 bullet points, it talks about the general need of affordable homes. So not necessarily council homes, is it, Mark? Which is why I bring in perhaps the other officers. And we're massively short, a massive shortfall on that target of affordable homes annually. So it goes back to a couple of items that have come to my, or one that's come to my plans panel. Councillor Khan referred to it earlier, and it's us or allowing developments to come forward with no contribution to affordable housing. I've got to really question why. And I know there's special circumstances, and you argue it's to bring a listed building back or lack of viability, etc., etc. But I'm not sure it's the right approach when you look at 23,000 on our housing list and so on and so forth. You can use the same arguments as to why we need to build these in a city, generally in a city sites. The same arguments extrapolated from the Airborough experience, where we've taken those greenbelt sites out because we've got in excess of a 5-year land supply. So in other words, we're not under pressure to build on these inner city sites either. I think we need to ask the communities, don't we? What's more important to them? Affordable housing, green space, the contributions, or recovering a listed building, or whatever other matters? Or can we look at our own compulsory purchasing the sites on occasions that aren't viable, because we don't have to make that 20% profit that's guaranteed, it appears, for most developers. So that overall strategy around trying to building more affordable homes. And then the second question, which is for you, Mark, going over to 4.6.9 and that awful right to buy legislation that really needs to change. I just want clarification on the new builds, because I believe we only get a third of our receipt back to build new houses. But on the new properties with that 15 years built-in protection, does that give us full cost recovery of the new builds? It's not just a third, is it? That's what I'm getting at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your comments, Councillor Ritchie. I mean, just on the overall strategy, I mean, just to reassure you and the other members, I mean, the delivery of affordable housing remains a very, very high priority for us through the planning service, and through the core strategy selective review, you'll recall that we've sought to increase the percentage targets as well for affordable housing. So it is something that we're very mindful of doing, and we're working hard within the service and with other services to achieve that. I think the challenge we have is in relation to individual schemes, and I think you've alluded to it, where there's this very challenging balance to be achieved between affordable housing, green space, perhaps listed building issues, etc., and arriving at a conclusion as to what's the best fit in terms of trying to accommodate all of those aspects, which in themselves are all priorities. I think we're very mindful also particularly within inner urban areas, that the lack of green space and the ability to achieve that on sites and in relation to development proposals. But it is integral to our strategy to increase that number, and we are working with colleagues in our regeneration teams and Mark's colleagues to boost the supply, and I think we've been successful in moving a number of schemes through the system. But I do agree with you that it does remain a major challenge, and applications where they are coming through to panel and are being considered, which has all of those policy balances within that mix, need to be considered very carefully to ensure that we can do the best we can in terms of delivering higher numbers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that bit, Kevin?
No, Chair, I think I've made my point. So no, just the second point, I think.
Okay, that's lovely. Okay. Yeah, so Mark, would you like to take the second issue?
Yeah, just briefly on the first point as well, Chair, if I may. I mean, one of the things that planning department colleagues are assisting us with, because Councillor Ritchie mentioned about CPO or purchases, that as part of ongoing reviews that colleagues do around sites that aren't coming forward, we've been assisted in terms of writing out as part of a regular kind of reminder that's sent out to those developers or landowners to say, on this occasion, that the council's also looking to boost its land supply and would be interested in doing that. And I'm pleased to report that I can't say that we can turn them into converted leads, but thanks to the support of David's team within planning, we've now got, I think, a list of possibly 30 additional sites that but are currently owned by developers or landowners who are saying, well, we might be interested in talking to the council about them purchasing all or part of these sites or properties. So in the new year, or we've already begun the process working with regeneration colleagues. We are looking at all different ways, because I didn't make the point in my introduction, but clearly 800 is great. But when you're looking to do 1,500 and there is 700 to go, we have to continue to kind of push on and find the rest of that. So planning department are extremely supportive in terms of that joint working, which I think members would see being absolutely essential in terms of us having a joined up approach to this. In terms of the second point, just briefly, yes, Councillor Ritchie, we're limited in terms of the 30% that we can apply as part of the scheme cost to deliver new units. The 15-year cost floor protection protects the notional cost of delivering the unit that's at sale. So it is a full protection rather than a third of the protection. But clearly, in terms of viability, we generally look at the HRA period of 30 years. So it does remain a risk and a threat, hence the need to kind of balance out all of these different things. So, but hopefully that explains it.
Okay, thank you. I can see you were nodding, Kevin. I assume, Councillor Ritchie, you're okay with that? Yeah. Right, I've just got Councillor Blackburn now to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Generally, what's behind the paper I support, and I don't want any answer to this and get into any long discussions, because I think the officers are responsible for this have had enough discussions over the period, and we have got battles to come coming next year, I think. But the issue is some of the sites that the inappropriate sites that have been chosen, and particularly in areas where the council has had land where it's sold off to the private sector for housing, where we could quite definitely have built council housing because we need them. But I just feel, certainly from my experience of this scheme, some of the sites that you're picking are highly inappropriate. And I've got to say, as you will find over the coming months, the one I'm referring to is highly unpopular with residents in my ward.
Mark, would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Blackburn. Without getting into scheme specifics or site specifics, because I am aware of the area that Councillor Blackburn is kind of alluding to. I think one of the other points that I would make is that one of the other difficult balances and probably sometimes is challenging and confusing is that there are areas where the council chooses, for instance, as an example, the Brownfield Land Programme, where we actively look to involve developers in purchasing council-owned land or assets in order to build homes for sale to diversify tenure within communities. Now, it is always a difficult balancing act, because clearly at the time that many of these programs were initiated, we were capped in terms of, and we had very limited HRA resources in which to develop our own housing solutions. And I think the thing that we are doing and will be of interest to members moving forward, but I haven't kind of committed to that within the paper today, is that as with other local authorities that have an active housing programme, we're also looking at where we might need to do mixed tenure schemes in order to ensure that affordable housing is delivered. So I'm not answering Councillor Blackburn's question that he hasn't asked, if that makes sense, but I understand the point he's making. But I'd say the general point to all members is that there will be brownfield land programs, there will be other regeneration programs that have been deliberately promoted in order to bring investment and bring tenure diversification into certain areas. We are now in a position that we weren't even 2 years ago, probably 3 years ago, certainly, to actually have a much more active programme. And hopefully you can see in terms of the aspiration in the paper, the commitment from the council and the executive board is to deliver as many affordable and ideally council homes for rent to meet the needs of the city.
Thank you, Mark. And I don't see any more hands going up. And so I'd like to thank you for a very, very helpful report and an excellent presentation in response to those points that were put to you. And as you say, I think the aspiration is there. We haven't achieved it yet. There's a journey to go, but clearly you're heading us in the right direction. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair.
No, I can't see anybody else indicating. So can I ask people, can we note the report, please, before moving on? And again, I'll just take silence as a yes. Lovely. So we'll move on now. Thank you very much, Mark, to our last item, substantive item agenda 11, placemaking and local plan update. And this is going to be presented by Jenny Fisher, who is the Principal Officer in Sustainable Development, and Catherine Holloway, Team Leader for City Development. Thank you both for being so patient, waiting until this point in the meeting before you can do your presentation. Please, over to you.
Thank you. I'll kick off if I may, and whilst Jenny is trying to upload a screen presentation for you. You may have spotted the mistake on the title of the report, for which I apologise, that of pacemaking, which is actually placemaking. Whilst this is a typo, perhaps it can be taken in the spirit that we're wanting to move at pace on enabling improvements in sustainable placemaking. The report and presentation Jenny and I will be giving this afternoon is very much an update on the report previously presented to Joint Plans Panel last July. And that was on cross-departmental work, including public health, active Leeds, planning, highways, parks and countryside, to build on the work of Leeds' 2014 public health report, with a focus on identifying practical steps to achieve benefits and added value between good design and planning for health and well-being. But in doing this work, that's overlapped significantly with the need to heighten existing placemaking policies to help respond to the climate emergency and the work that we're doing to progress the local plan update. So this report provides an update on this work. It links into the local plan update, which is the next steps set out in the report, and the opportunities to promote greater focus on placemaking within the local plan, with the emphasis on the crossover influences and ambitions to make Leeds the best city for health and wellbeing and helping to meet the city's climate emergency targets. I think I've managed to fill that in whilst Jenny's got the slides, so I'll hand over to Jenny. Thank you.
I have. Thank you, Catherine. Jenny Fisher from Design Team City Development. Can you see the presentation I put up on the screen now?
Yes, we can.
I'm hoping it's filling your screen.
Yes, we can, but it could do to be a little bit bigger if you could manage it, Jenny.
Yes. Okay. Just trying to work out how to do that.
It's gone smaller now.
Hold on a minute. I'll just try and get you onto the screen across.
If you can't do it, Jenny, we'll live with that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why it's not. Is that better?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes. Yes, that's better.
Yeah, this is actually part of this is a repeat of the presentation we gave to Joint Plans Panel last year, or July 2019 now. So I'd like to update you on the work we've been doing since then. As you all know, Leeds City Council has prioritised placemaking and design for resilient communities for many years now. We have basically the two key documents, Building for Tomorrow Today and Neighbourhoods for Living. We're actually intending to merge and update those two documents because we feel, along with the Highways Design Guide, all this information should really be in one place. The preparation of this new document will work alongside the local plan update. We're also working closely with public health on this work, and also with the University of Leeds. This is just a slight introduction, actually, of a training resource that we've been working on this year, placemaking for resilient communities. The aim of this is clearly, we've got a commitment to making Leeds carbon neutral by 2030. COVID-19 has emphasised the importance of placemaking. I'd like to show you that this is actually a piece of training that we've actually rolled out to all our colleagues in city development. And our next aim is actually to present it for you all. So obviously Councillor McKenna has mentioned earlier about the need for training in planning, but this is something that, again, we wanted to sort of share it with colleagues first, and we're ready to sort of share it with you all as well now. So we'd quite like to sort of arrange some sessions early in the new year, if that's okay. And I hope you'll find it interesting. I've got a couple of extracts from that training just to whet your appetites. This is just an example of, you know, a typical layout, what we'd be looking for if we were trying to design something that we thought addressed all the health and well-being, climate mitigation issues. And it's a starting point really for just discussing these with colleagues and with you all and any interested parties outside the authority. We've also got this slide on existing character, and the key thing here is that there is no such thing as a cleared site. This is important because obviously, you know, we've got you know, Garnet's Mill hydropower. You know, we're utilising the river at Otley. You know, we've got the image here of Accordia in Cambridgeshire, where they've utilised and maintained all those existing mature trees, which certainly creates fantastic feature for the site. But it's using the contours of the site and just basically using what's there already. This piece of work, you've seen this graphic before, so I don't want to dwell too much on these slides because they are in the, you know, explained better in the report. But the three key principles that we actually put together back in 2016 when we first started working closely with public health was active neighbourhoods, better air quality and green space, and cohesive communities. And you know, 4 years later, these are all very relevant to what we're going through, particularly this year with the challenges with COVID-19. Again, some of you will have seen these slides before. I tend to show them in presentations, but this is Malmo in Sweden. We're also looking at, you've probably heard the words 20-minute neighbourhoods used a lot this year in webinars. There's been an awful lot of webinars that we've all been attending while we've been home working. 20-minute neighbourhood is what it sounds, and we've all been doing that this year when we've been in lockdown, is exploring our neighbourhoods, getting to know our neighbours and making that 20-minute journey instead of getting in the car. And just really embracing what's around us and certainly celebrating our green space. City development and public health are currently working on the development of a walking action plan for the city covering key environmental priorities, and has led to the initiation of work to start mapping walking routes across the city. And this partnership working will hopefully deliver walkable, low traffic neighbourhood schemes in priority neighbourhoods. We're certainly doing some key work in Lincoln Green and the recreations in Beeston at the moment. Healthy spaces where communities can connect, and walking and cycling is easiest, most attractive option of movement is our aim. I wanted to use a couple of case studies here because I wanted to, you know, it to be clear that we're already got some really fantastic schemes that are either in the pipeline in the city or are already been out there for quite some time. And the case study for active neighbourhoods, I feel, is Kirkstall Forge coming forward, where placemaking, you know, is first on that initial master plan with connectivity and connections to that natural setting. The master plans promoting healthy lifestyles, and it's been very much developed to build, you know, social and integrated community. And there's a new railway station that you'll be aware of on that site. And again, pocket parks. They've got pocket parks littered around the site and pedestrian-friendly roads to encourage, you know, active, sustainable travel. The second of our principles is better air quality and green space. You can see the images here. We're already doing it in Leeds. We've got the fantastic Roeth Veolia waste recycling in Leeds that has this wonderful green wall. And we are getting inquiries from members to say, well, what, can we do this? Can we do more of this? And certainly it's something which we are trying to encourage developers to incorporate. The case study for this one is a climate innovation district, which I know many of you will be aware of. I went down, actually had a walk around it a few weeks ago, anticipating I'll be talking about it today. And it's impressive the way it's developing. The manufacturing on site. It's all about this riverside setting, focusing on the biodiversity, green, sustainable travel. And when I walked around there was a lot of people homeworking in the windows here. So it's clearly an active community already. The third of our principles is cohesive communities. And this is really, again, it's been a key this year in people sort of getting to know their community and finding that it's so important to have those co-located services and high quality neighbourhood spaces to encourage that social interaction. The image on the bottom right, again, some of you will be aware of this. It's Catch, the community facility in Hare Hills. Really is quite an exemplar of community cohesion, as training for young people, cafe, food growing. They've even got goats and a gym, and they really are embracing their local community and particularly their young people. Case study for this one is Lilac in Bramley, co-housing community, and again, the founder of this development is a resident, and it's, if you haven't been to visit it, it's certainly worth a visit. It's got an allotment on site. It's all about shared facilities and community. Very, very highly sustainable, energy efficient. But again, this is a one-off. We're not rolling these out. They're not everyone's cup of tea, but certainly I think we should be giving people the choice if this is the way they want to live. The one thing I particularly like about this is these, the community aspect, the meeting rooms, the shared meals in the common house. They've got communal gardens and a shared laundry and a tool store. I mean, why do we all need our own washing machines? We don't. You get that sense of community going to do your laundry together. I also just wanted to remind everybody really that we are doing this successfully elsewhere. We've got a number of award-winning schemes in Leeds. We've got Saxton Gardens, which won a Housing Design Award, REBA Awards, former council apartment blocks that have been beautifully restored. The former Wharfdale Hospital site in Otley, which is often overlooked as an exemplar, which, I mean, I certainly think it's been beautifully restored. Then we've got Allerton Bywater Millennium Village, which again is one of the largest home zones in the UK, holds a Building for Life Gold Award, and we often use that one as a case study. The Brownfield Land Programme development, I'm hoping Mark Denton's still with us, because that needs celebrating. It was a finalist in the RTPI Awards for Planning Excellence in 2020. I'll just be showing you some slides on that a little bit later on. Parklands in Moortown. This was a very difficult, had a difficult planning history, this site, formerly privately owned sports field, but now residential development of just 25 houses with an urban park. And they provided land for the local school for educational use. Yarn Street, again, it's a lot of people don't know about this one, but it's a small scheme on Hunslet Riverside, and sustainable travel to the city centre, pedestrian-friendly streets and play spaces. Just to have a look very briefly at a few of these. Urban Splash. This is one of their flagship projects still. Existing blocks retained, repurposed. They've got communal recycling facilities, urban allotments on site. They give give those over to the local community if they've got some spare. So again, we're doing, we're talking about, creating pedestrian friendly spaces and segregated walkways and making it very healthy to live in these places. And we're doing this. This is Parklands at Moortown, and this is a site that could have been completely covered in houses. And there was a developer that listened to the local community and only developed on 30% of the site and gifted the remaining 70% over to the local community and to our parks department. Very well used and popular. Brownfield land programme, been very successful. It's providing an awful lot of homes for people that need it. But I'm comparing this one with Goldsmith Street in Norwich, in Nottingham rather. This has got an architect on board, Mikhail Riches, and this is the key here. I think is Nottingham City Council have managed to create this groundbreaking development, and chiefly because they've got a top name architect involved. But we've got some fantastic architects working with Leeds City Council, and the question I'm asking really is we could do this on our council-owned sites. We can certainly learn the lessons from solar gain from those very gently sloping roofs. They've got an awful lot of communal space, and it's all about sustainable active travel and play spaces and people being part of a community. Just a few others that I'm sure you're aware of, but I just feel that it's an opportunity really to celebrate schemes that we've done well. This is for former Wharfdale Hospital in Otley, skillful restoration of listed buildings and sensitively detailed new build. It's a very nice scheme. We often talk about Millennium Village in Alton Bywater. Phase 2 has been successful as well, and we've got those street trees, segregated walkways to encourage active travel. Front gardens provide defensible space, but they also have planting which absorbs rainfall, provides habitats and amenity value. What I like about this scheme is you've got window treatments, corner treatments, gable ends. There's a lot of active frontages here. You feel safe and secure on these sites. And again, a comment made by Councillor Jenkins earlier about secure by design. I mean, that's certainly being looked at, at Kirksall Forge, but also here. You'd feel safe, I think, walking around here. Just a few other ones here: Yarn Street, Grimes Dyke, Churchfields in Boston Spa. We've got, again, integrated play spaces, segregated walkways, buildings in context. I mean, Yarn Street is right next to Hunslet Mill, and a lot of the design of these buildings is trying to relate to that historic building next door. Bottom left, sorry, I've gone back a one. Picture bottom left is Grimes Dyke, and again, it's got certain features on that site that are very successful in retaining trees and green space and creating opportunities for total segregated walkways away from the roads. So the dominance of the car results in housing that is characterised by hard surfacing and tarmac. So what is the solution? And these are just questions that we're always asking ourselves, and I'm sure you're also asking, when you see housing developments coming through for you to look at. This is quite an old image from Mark Biddulph, 2001, but it's still very relevant in that cars and parking separated from pedestrians and social areas, next to housing. That's what we should be looking at here. Don't assume that you have to have your car right outside your front door. Then, how can we encourage our residents to walk and be active? Well, they want to feel as if it's healthy to do so. So really trying to push these segregated walking and cycleways, but have a planted barrier between them, so that you're not breathing in the traffic fumes. Last slide one of the last slides from me, but I saw this last weekend, and that's for community Christmas spirit. This virgin oak wood has been adopted for many years with a biodiverse wildflower border. And they've put local residents put a Christmas tree on the corner. I think that's fantastic. But also, segregated walkways, we're already doing it. Steinbeck Road in Meanwood has an historic footway cycleway, and I think we need to celebrate, the success stories here. And I know we're all trying to improve on the design quality, and I think that's so important. But it's so important to celebrate what we already have. This again, I've shown before in presentations, but this is Trumpington Meadows in Cambridge, and this is the sort of thing that we're talking about. Is the segregation, centralised waste disposal. Just very briefly on the university, they've done some fantastic work, research work, mapped all the trees on the campus to try and work out, how many tons of carbon they store. And over their lifetimes, the campus trees have stored over 540 tons of carbon, which is absolutely huge. And that's the equivalent to the annual carbon footprint of around 180 people living in the UK. So a key thing to mention here is that they're not just doing work on the campus, they're also working alongside us at Leeds City Council, and they've done a lot of research in Middleton Park, exactly the same exercise in mapping how much carbon all the trees in Middleton Park are absorbing and storing. How to tackle the problem of refuse collections and wheelie bins. We're sick of seeing wheelie bins all over the place, but centralised waste disposal is the way forward. And we are having conversations with a volume house builder at the moment on a couple of key sites in Leeds, big sites in Leeds, and we have to start looking at this, because we don't want to find we're 5 years down the line and we're wondering why we never even started the conversations about this. But we are having those conversations with our waste service team, and again they're doing it in Wembley Park and Barking in London, and Northwest Cambridge. It'd be lovely if they came this far north, but Taylor Wimpey, they're talking to us for Easter Weatherby site and the East Leeds extension. I'm going to hand you over now to Catherine.
Thanks, Jenny. So the case studies Jenny's just run through set out that we have already got a number of good examples of this working, and we've got good planning policies in place which embed good policy placemaking principles. However, the local plan update recognises the need to investigate the implementation of these, and where possible to update, heighten and strengthen the local plan to take account of the climate change context and emphasise the health and well-being, and seek to identify where more ambitious policies may be needed. So a paper presenting the placemaking elements of climate change alongside a number of other technical policy areas in respect to the local plan update was presented to Development Plans Panel on the 3rd of November, and with a further scoping paper to go in January, with the intention to go out towards Regulation 18, which is public consultation on the scoping document of the local plan update in spring next year. And as these draft policies progress through the plan making process, they'll be able to give them more weight depending on the level of objection to them. Can you move to the next slide, please, Jenny? So in terms of placemaking, the local plan update advocates a new approach to placemaking in order to align with existing council priorities. We know that well-designed places are already key to local planning and is expressed through policy P10 design, and that's set out in the core strategy. However, it's felt that the existing policy could be strengthened, and the vision for Leeds is to have a strong policy framework that pulls out the issues that Jenny's highlighted, to ensure that planning policy and decisions achieve healthy, inclusive, safe, resilient, adaptable places, and that Leeds is designed to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. So the current policy that we've got does lack explicit reference to health and well-being and climate change. Therefore, we feel that there could be more done to provide a stronger hook and stronger signposting to the other policies within the core strategy, which have important linkages in the general concept of placemaking. It's not just design, but it's the whole concept of green spaces, spaces around buildings, how the buildings are built, and accessibility and connectivity. It's therefore proposed that through a local plan update, we'll introduce a new strategic policy, putting placemaking at the heart of planning and design with stronger hooks for stronger, healthier neighbourhoods. If you want to move to the next slide, Jenny. So our final slides, just pulling out a quote from the World Health Organization back in 2012, who said that local councils can have their most important long-term effect on health and the cross benefits to climate change through the decisions they take about spatial planning. And the very last slide. The collaborative work across planning, design, highways, active Leeds, parks and countryside, public health is enabling improvements in sustainable placemaking by providing the necessary evidence and influencing the developers and investors into Leeds. And we hope that building this whole system collaboration with health-focused and climate change design solutions will see notable future increases in healthy and resilient communities. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny and Catherine. As ever, I feel completely inspired by that presentation, and I'm sure lots of colleagues around the table feel the same way. Those are the fundamental principles of moving forward, and really inspiring to see. But I have to say that you did mention earlier on, I think it was in Jenny's part, the need to encourage developers, and I've put a little exclamation mark against that on my notes. Because the reality is we find ourselves in a plans panel and we are finding massive barriers and difficulties with some developers in moving in these directions. So I throw that challenge to David to consider throughout the debate. But I do think that what you've shared with us today, personally, from a personal point of view, is absolutely the way forward. And with that, I'll throw the floor open for debate and comment. Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm very supportive of this agenda, but I would say, and actually I'm going to use the example of Yarn Street in Hunslet. The development may have been designed to be that way, but it's actually a living nightmare for residents because actually the places around it have not been designed to work with it. So they're in the middle of an industrial estate. They're now overdeveloped because of Hunslet Mill putting pressure onto the system. They don't have a shop. The nearest shop is across two main roads, which are in the middle of rebuilding. And their other bit's access to a towpath, which is now so busy, it's actually quite problematic for people. So as much as I think your strategy is right, I think where it happens is so important because on paper, Yarn Street is perfect. In reality, it fills my inbox with 3 or 4 emails a day of complaints, because actually the place it was put was wrong. And I think this is where we have to come to the point, I think Councillor Groom has mentioned about the developers. They put as many properties in that as possible to make that financially viable. So all that potential was completely destroyed because they tried to shove as much in as possible. And I suppose my comment is the internal mechanisms of the council need to stop fighting each other, because actually that is perfect on paper. It's not in reality.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. I'll take a few points on this and then I'll ask officers to respond. So if you could note that point, and we'll hear from Councillor Reagan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, finding that presentation fantastic and like you said, inspiring. But I've got a real issue about affordable housing and about social housing, and I think these big development sites that are bringing these particular issues into it are putting barriers up for social housing. But because if they're at the side of these new developments, they're seen as an added extra, and they're not able to get involved in this particular these particular events that are happening. So I think we've got to bear in mind that all these aspirations are for all the people of the areas, not just for the ones that can afford your top end housing.
Thank you. And I'll take one more point before we come back to officers. Councillor Garthwaite.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad that you mentioned indoor space as well as the focus on outdoor space, which is obviously important, because indoor community space is incredibly important for things that people want to do together, whether it's having a party or going to Slimming World or Zumba or being in a choir or having a cultural celebration or a Christmas fair or having a meeting, whatever. And so many of these big developments that we see, particularly on the edge of the city when the plans come forward, there's nowhere like that. And it's just that people seem to be in these atomized little houses where they have to travel a really long way to get to anything like that, which is not helpful at all. So I'm glad that was mentioned. And I agree with what both the previous speakers have said as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So Jenny and Catherine, if you could pick those points up for us. Councillor Ray on suitability of place, Councillor Reagan on affordable housing, and Councillor Garthwaite on indoor space.
Okay, shall I go first, Catherine? Thank you very much. They're very helpful comments. Absolutely agree with what Councillor Ray said about Yarn Street. It's a really difficult one because I you know, as an urban designer, you know, I would love us to be designing developments that are car free, or you know, have car clubs attached to them, and we're trying to reduce that dominance of the car, but we're not there yet. And I think over the last few years since Yarn Street has been developed, I think car ownership has probably increased even more. Everyone seems to need to have 2 or 3 cars. So I absolutely agree with you on that. There's an awful lot of work we need to do with our highways department. But on a positive, things are definitely going to change in the future. There are going to be less cars on the road. And I think we need to be obviously looking forward to the day that happens. But I agree with you, Councillor Ray, that leaves you with a headache with what happens at the moment. And you know, certainly Yarn Street was developed as an opportunity for one of the first developments right next to the city centre that was trying to encourage active travel. So I think their aspiration was right, and we encourage them, but we have to be realistic. And if you have issues like that, we need to know, you know, we need to know about them because it's useful for us for other schemes we're looking at. And Councillor Reagan's comment about affordable and social housing, absolutely agree with you on that. It can't possibly be a matter of, you know, that whoever can afford it gets the best developments and the best looking developments. And you know, one criticism, you know, you could say about, you know, Situ, Kirkstall Forge, and even Lilac, the 3 case studies I showed along with our principals. Yes, they're fantastic, but you've got to be able to afford those, and it would be fantastic to roll those out across our council schemes and to our affordable, you know, affordable housing schemes. And again, it's something I'll follow up with. We're in regular conversations with Mark Denton in council housing growth, and we'd certainly love to do more work with them to, you know, to ensure that this happens, that, you know, there's not a divide between, you know, the affordable housing, how they look, and other housing. They have to sit well together. So, you know, I can assure you that we are looking into that, but it is again a difficult one. Volume house builders are trying to get maximum profits for their sites. Councillor Garthwaite, again, in these indoor community spaces, I mean, you know, we've had a dreadful year with COVID-19, but this is possibly a positive that will come out of this, is that we're not in the city centre offices anymore. A lot of us are working on our own at home. I'd certainly benefit from having a hub, you know, within walking distance of my house here that I could, you know, that we could walk to and have a bit of a community feel about it. And I'd like to think that is something that is going to happen, that people want more facilities in their local communities. So again, things are changing all the time, but again, yes, it's something that we certainly look at all the time when we're designing places.
Thank you for that, Jenny. Would anyone else like to add anything? I've got Councillor Nash to come in. Did you want to come back on any of that, Catherine? Did you need to add to any of that, or are you happy with leaving it there for the moment.
I'm happy with that, Councillor Green. I will just add that we do have policies in place to make sure that affordable housing is fully integrated, and that there should be no difference in inclusivity for design. Design should be approached for all sites, regardless of the tenure and type. And also, you know, just to pick up on the point that Jenny's made on the situation with the COVID pandemic, that has really emphasised the need for personal space, public space, and easy, commutable, accessible connections to facilities. And that's really playing through the thoughts of patterns of placemaking, as well as individual, the sort of microcosmic placemaking on individual sites. So bringing back to the comment that Councillor Ray's made, yes, we can approach a sort of a specific design approach on a particular site. That then will hopefully spread its wings out into the existing communities. This is very much a principled approach on new development, not on retrospective development and fitting them in, but it is looking at patterns of growth as well as just placemaking on a particular site.
Thank you for that. Councillor Nash.
Yes, I'd just like to support what my colleague Councillor Ray said about Yarn Street. Yarn Street is a nicely designed estate, I have to say. But when it came up to the plans panel, I objected to the number of flats that were being built there. As my usual, we need more houses in Hunslet. And I pointed out that Hunslet Mill was likely to be converted into flats. I mean, I accept if you have a building like Hunslet Mill, you can't do anything else with it, but have flats. And the plans panel very patronisingly said, it was from the chair, well, perhaps we can arrange for you to meet the developers to discuss this issue. So I went to meet the developers, and they very shortly said, we've got planning permission to build what we want and we're going to do it. And then, lo and behold, when they'd finished the estate, they had the cheek to say, can we waive the Section 106 money because they're not making as much profit from this site as they expected? Well, you know what our answer was to that. But Paul is absolutely right. There is absolutely no facilities whatsoever. And they although it's not far, if you're a walker, the only way that you can walk is along the riverside. And quite frankly, at night time, it is just not safe. So I think we all have to be aware that when we are building estates, that there are facilities, that there is a shop, there is connectivity with elsewhere in the area. So I'm pleased that Paul raised that.
Thank you, Liz. Would Catherine or Jenny want to comment on that? And perhaps David might want to come in on the more strategic element of why these things don't happen as a matter of course.
Thank you. I'm beginning to regret putting Yarn Street in my presentation now, but in some respects I'm glad I did, because it's very useful for us to hear this feedback. But I haven't really got anything to add to what I said before. Really, it was, it was designed and built in good faith that it was going to be using the Royal Arm, everything that was happening at the Royal Armouries. But yes, points taken. And this is probably a bit of a different scheme than the others that I presented. So I hope everyone understands that. I don't want to, appear all the focus being on this particular scheme. It is very different. In what it was trying to do, I think, this one.
Yeah, can I just very briefly say, this is a classic case of panels and officers not taking notice of what local members know to be true. So I'd hope that in the future, local members' input will be taken much more notice of. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Point taken. But I have to say, you referred on a couple of occasions as well in your presentation to this is a one-off and we're not rolling these out yet. And this is because of the attitude of developers and the kind of conversation that Councillor Nash has just described. And I'm not absolutely anti-developer per se, but the practicality of it is that they're not rolling these out, and they're not rolling these out in an affordable form. And that's where we need to get to. So we can have good policies, but there are always reasons why, you know, they can't be complied with, or there are special circumstances or whatever. And we really do need to get through that. So this vision is a properly shared vision, in my view. That would be my comment. David, I don't know whether you want to come in on any of this. I have seen you indicating, Councillor Carlin.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, you know, we certainly echo members' views about the importance of design quality and its delivery. And as Catherine and Jenny have said, you know, we are seeking to drive that forward across the district and to take advice from local communities and residents as well in terms of design quality and delivery. I think the issue of practice, I think the issue we have is that it's variable, isn't it? We have some good developers with some good examples and some pioneering work, and then we have other examples which don't meet the standards that we're setting through our policies. I think where I'd like us to get to is to a tipping point where we have more of the good than the disappointing schemes, and then we get a momentum overall, and we're able then to signpost towards what good actually looks like, and more importantly, good in relation to being resilient and meeting the needs of affordable housing and the climate emergency. So I think we're working through that transition at the moment, aren't we, where we've got some very good and positive schemes that are seeking to do that, but it's rolling that out district wide and also ensuring that it's picked up by volume developers as well as individual bespoke schemes as well.
Thank you. Councillor Carlile.
Thank you, Chair. It was more of a general point, and following on from, so thanks, Jenny, for coming. And I think members were all really appreciative of the update you gave 18 months, as you told me ago, which is a bit of a surprise to me, but there you go. Just really support the work that you're doing there. I think obviously members have made comments about particular schemes that haven't worked, but obviously you're trying out new things in various areas. And we've talked about other issues between meetings, and what's good to see is that it really is joint across the council with different services coming together. And I think a lot of that has brought improvements to the developments you've worked on so far, and members are really supportive of that. And I think quite often we're asking then how we can take this further. So the idea of more training and understanding for members, I think is really good on that. Maybe looking into some of those developments that we've had, hearing from ward members. I think was a comment Councillor Mulheron put in there that was a good one about what their experiences have been, so we can help improve those. My 2 points really, I think, on that are when you came 18 months ago, and I know you've done a lot of work since then, I think the members at panel that were most supportive, what we really wanted to know is, David's completely right on this, we do have good developers showing us great examples of practice, and we do have some that unfortunately aren't showing us the practice we'd like to see. I think members would really want to know what strengths they have to try and improve the development. So more of an understanding of the issues you're dealing with, but also an understanding of the legal basis that we have to ask for these improvements in development, so that we can bring more forward that are of the kind of quality you're discussing. Also, there is that one in the back of my mind that we're dealing with new developments here, and obviously we're in a plans panel meeting. The improvements to existing estates is always one in my mind. So obviously new developments come forward and we can seek to do what we can, but quite often I know we've got work, for instance, going on around the recreations to try and improve that existing neighbourhood, but we've obviously got a lot of neighbourhoods, many of which were built in the Victorian times, that could do with bringing up to date and improvements on a number of these issues. So that's one members will have. I'll leave it more as a comment, Chair, on that, but I think just really looking forward to having more in depth on this, more of an understanding of the issues, and then more of an understanding really, as I say again, on how we as members can support these kind of proposals going through and ensuring that we get more of those good developments rather than those where unfortunately they may be lacking.
Thank you, Peter. I can't see any more contributions. Is there anyone else who would like to contribute at this point? Okay. Can I thank you again, Catherine and Jenny, for that presentation. It fascinates me every time I hear another update, and we wait with bated breath to hear more about the progress that you're making. But I think I can feel a consensus around the virtual table that you are undoubtedly leading us in the right direction on this, and that the principles are absolutely fine. But there's a degree of work on the detail, isn't there, and the understanding and the knowledge from experience that will take us to the next phase. But as ever, very enlightening, very informative, and thank you very much indeed. Can I ask Jonathan and David whether either of you would like to sum this last item up or say anything in conclusion?
Sorry, just taking myself off mute, Chair. Again, I'd like to thank colleagues for the presentation and also members for their comments. And it's quite easy, isn't it, when we've had papers on sort of performance, looking at statistics and some of the metrics around the numbers of applications, et cetera, to lose sight of what it is that we're trying to achieve overall and longer term. And for me, this is about leaving a positive planning legacy. And I think good design and sustainability and responding to the council's priorities in terms of inclusive growth, well-being and climate emergency is absolutely integral to what we need to be seeking to achieve, and leaving a positive planning legacy. We just want to see more of it, don't we? And we need to be joining forces collectively to make sure that that happens, because we owe it to future generations and communities of today to achieve that. So that's what's driving us forward as a service and what we're committed to doing, notwithstanding the challenges we have about ever-changing policy at a national level and also the current budget circumstance. You know, we will do what we can to move things on throughout. So again, Chair, could I just thank you for your contribution, and members this afternoon for what's been a very useful session for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I should have actually just mentioned, for the benefit of Councillor McKenna, that Lilac is actually in Armley, but only just. It's right on the border. So it actually belongs to Armley, but I have visited it and it's very interesting. Okay, so I think unless there is any other business, I can.
Thank you for that, Chair. I was going to raise that with Jenny, but I thought it might be a bit niggly. I live on the same street as Lilac, and I've actually got a Kirkstall address, but it is solidly in the Armley ward. In fact, it was the Armley councillors, myself and former councillor Alison Lowe, who made it happen by persuading the council that this was a scheme we should support with council resources. So I don't particularly want to take credit for it, but it is solidly in the Armley ward, as you said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that does draw us to a conclusion. I'd like to wish everybody a happy Christmas break and let us all hope for a better new year. My only apology of the afternoon is to say tradition would say that we would all be having mince pies. Unfortunately, I can't get them through the internet to you, so we'll have to make up for it after the new year.
Yeah.
Next time we can get in a real room. So thank you all for your patience. It has been a long meeting, and I'm grateful that you all hung on in there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.